The price of power. The dark side gives, and then it takes everything away. Every Sith Lord learns that truth, but only at the end, when the power they command begins to consume them from within. The dark side does not age its servants as time does. It hollows them. It burns them from the inside out, until the flesh softens and the soul grows brighter and more unstable, straining against the mortal shell that contains it. For most Sith, that destruction comes quickly. For Sidious, it came slowly. He had become the living embodiment of the dark side, a being so powerful that even his victories poisoned him. And unlike those who came before, he understood what was happening to his body. He had seen it in the ancient texts. He knew that the same fire that elevated him would one day devour him. But he believed that he could think his way past it. He believed that knowledge, control, and the dark side would outlast this decay. He believed he could master the very force that was killing him. The dark side was a flame, and he was certain that he was its keeper. But a flame does not serve. It only ever burns. In Dark Empire, we learned something new about Palpatine. Palpatine avoided fighting Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi and engaging with him in a duel. He didn't avoid fighting Luke out of mercy or out of arrogance. He did it out of a very real fear. Not necessarily fear for Luke's strength, but fear of his own decay. By the time of Return of the Jedi, the Emperor's body was rotting from decades of channeling the dark side. Every burst of power burned through him, threatening to unravel the fragile vessel that still contained his spirit. It began slowly. At first, the power felt divine. The blood hums with energy. Every sense sharpens. The air itself feels alive beneath your skin. You feel limitless. You feel immortal. Then the current begins to turn. The blood thickens. The heart struggles. The muscles ache not from exertion, but from resistance. The body begins to reject the power that sustains it. The force stops flowing through you. It starts to move you, to puppeteer your failing flesh like a marionette. You have become a corpse animated by the power of your own will. This was the state that Darth Sidious lived in. Every movement was an act of command, every breath a struggle of focus. His body was no longer his. It was a dying vessel kept alive by the dark side's refusal to let him rest. The dark side was not content with simply empowering him. It needed to inhabit him, and it was tearing him apart from the inside out. By the time he was Emperor for nearly 2 decades, he could feel it under his skin, the crackle of energy pressing against its boundaries, desperate to escape. Every surge of power risked burning the flesh away completely. He had become a living paradox of Sith power, power so absolute that it destroyed its master. He wasn't being chased by death any longer. Death was inside him, clawing its way out piece by piece, while the dark side refused to release its prize. This was the Emperor's existence in his final years, the most powerful being in the galaxy trapped in a cage of decaying flesh. It was in this state of decline that the Emperor first heard the name Luke Skywalker, a pilot, a hero of the rebellion, a boy. At first he thought it was a coincidence, a name borrowed from history. Then he felt it, the spark. The force trembled. It carried an unmistakable signature, bright, powerful, defiant. A Skywalker. And for the first time in decades, the Emperor hesitated. He remembered the first, the chosen one, the child that he had molded since youth, the apprentice that he had broken, reshaped, and corrupted into a perfect monster. Anakin had been predictable, ambitious, arrogant, ruled by his passion. He could be manipulated because he needed to be understood. But Luke was different. He was not a creation of the dark side. He was an anomaly born beyond Palpatine's reach, untouched by the corrupting influence of power. He was pure potential, shaped by compassion, friendship, and faith in the way of the Jedi. And that frightened the Emperor more than anything in his life. When Sidious first confirmed the boy's identity, his instinct was not curiosity, it was actual fear. The Emperor immediately considered eliminating him, perhaps even sending his strongest hand, Mara Jade, to do the job. This was the first reaction to Luke, not the hunger to corrupt, but the impulse to erase. Because this time, the Force had created something outside of his design, and the Emperor could not abide by what he could not control. But to understand exactly where this story comes from, much of what it follows is informed by what will come after Return of the Jedi, from Dark Empire, a series published in the early 1990s that takes place after Return of the Jedi. In Dark Empire, the Emperor returns from death through alchemy and cloning, revealing that his apparent demise on Endor was not the end of his story, but the beginning of a far greater transformation. The series drastically reshaped how we interpret Palpatine's final years, showing that his decay, his paranoia, and obsession with immortality were not simply the consequences of age, but were a part of a deliberate and a terrifying plan to transcend death itself. What makes Dark Empire especially significant is that it retroactively alters how we see the events in Return of the Jedi. It reframes Palpatine's weakness, his hesitation to fight Luke, and his physical deterioration as a result of a deeper lore, the rot of the dark side consuming him from within, while at the same time preparing for his rebirth on the hidden world of Byss. So while Dark Empire takes place long after Endor, it gives us a clearer lens through which to understand why Palpatine acted as he did in Return of the Jedi, and specifically, why he didn't confront Luke at the lightsaber or with the Force here, instead operating through proxies, why he was afraid to face Luke, but also why he hid his true power, why in the end, death itself was another step in his design. Palpatine had spent his entire life perfecting the rule of two, the belief that the dark side was not meant to conquer through armies, but through infection. The Sith were not soldiers, they were parasites. They conquered not by war, but through corruption. The strong ruled from the shadows, turning others into extensions of their will. Violence was for the impatient. True dominance came from control. That was why Sidious had built the Empire as he did. Not as a legion of warlords, but as a pyramid of dependence. Every admiral, every governor, every inquisitor, even Vader was just another puppet, dancing to the rhythm of Sidious's mind. To unleash raw power was to waste. To strike directly was to abandon mastery for chaos. The Emperor did not destroy his enemies, he converted them. He didn't crush civilizations, he taught them to enslave themselves. It was that ideology that shaped his reaction to Luke. He could not simply kill the boy. That was the act of a barbarian, not the act of a master. The rule of two demanded patience, subtlety, control. He wanted Luke to follow his own will, to validate the Sith philosophy one more time. But beneath the calm calculation, Sidious knew the truth. He could not afford confrontation. His body was failing. His power was unstable. He could destroy Luke, yes, but he may destroy himself in the process. And so he elected restraint. He would let Vader act as his sword, his instrument of temptation and of fear. The Master would remain in the shadows, preserving the illusion of control. However, while the cage of flesh continued to rot, while the galaxy fought and burned, the Emperor's true empire was built in secret, not on Coruscant, but on the hidden world known as Byss. To the lucky few, Byss was a paradise, a reward for loyalty, a refuge of peace, safety, and beauty under the Emperor's watchful and loving eye. The transports descended through perfect skies, greeted by gleaming cities of marble and glass. Every street radiated calm, every tower shone white beneath an endless sun. Citizens walked in harmony, their hearts light, their minds at peace. They believed that they had escaped the chaos of the galaxy and found eternal serenity. But serenity is the mask of slavery. The air carried something else, a subtle hum, a whisper that pressed gently against one's mind. At night, the citizens slept deeply. They dreamed of light, of joy, of service. Each morning they awoke slightly weaker, slightly more docile, and none of them ever questioned why. Because Byss was not a paradise, it was a battery. Every heartbeat on its surface fed the Emperor. Every sigh, every dream, every thought bled into the dark side and up towards the throne. The planet had been turned into a wound, a living engine designed to sustain its master. Beneath its shining streets stretched a labyrinth of laboratories and chambers. Cloning vats lined the walls, rows of half-formed bodies suspended in green light, some human, some monstrous, all bred for a single purpose, to either serve as vessels for Palpatine's soul, or monsters for the Dark Empire. In the depths, scientists and adepts worked in silence, mixing science with sorcery. Above them, in a black spire that pierced the clouds, the Emperor wrote, filling holocrons with dark side knowledge and tales of immortality, meditations on the nature of the soul, doctrines on control. Byss was not merely a world, it was a monastery, his laboratory, the Emperor's heart. To Darth Sidious, it was perfection. A world where every being served its purpose. A society without rebellion, without disorder, without choice. It was the rule of two written across a planet. One master, infinite servants. But the perfection was an illusion. Every day as Byss fed him, the fire within him burned hotter. He was devouring paradise, and paradise was dying beneath his feet. On Byss, Palpatine ceased to be a ruler and became something else. He became something closer to a god of the dark side. He had learned to send his mind beyond the body, into the void beneath life and death. He explored the currents of a realm known as chaos, where most spirits dissolve, and he began to map them. He discovered that the dark side could preserve identity through sheer will, that a spirit could persist as long as it refused to yield. He would not simply survive death, he would learn to rule it. His essence transfer experiments were no longer theory, they became ritual. Sidious practiced displacing fragments of his will into these cloned bodies, then pulling them back again, perfecting the art of rebirth. He was becoming something older than the rule of two. He no longer sought to rule from the shadows. He wanted to rule as the ancients did, openly, as a warlord of the dark side. Byss was his cocoon. The galaxy beyond was merely a shell. And yet, a light still burned. Luke Skywalker. Every time Sidious stretched out into the Force, he could feel it. A current of harmony cutting through the darkness. The Jedi. Luke was everything the dark side was not. Compassion, balance, purity. That purity defied the Emperor's logic and his control. He told himself that Luke's fall was inevitable, that every Skywalker eventually surrendered to darkness. But even he knew it wasn't true. Luke was not Anakin. He was what Anakin should have been, what Palpatine could never create. And that's what made him so insanely dangerous. Sidious felt it instinctively. If he confronted Luke before his work was finished, the chaos of the living Force would break him open. And so he waited. He watched. He sent Vader again and again, letting the apprentice test the boy's strength, erode his hope, draw him closer to the dark side, closer to the precipice. He believed corruption was safer than combat, because a duel with Luke would be a duel with the Force itself. Not that he couldn't beat him, but because he was facing a Skywalker, a wild card and an anomaly. He believed that even should he triumph, his body may be ripped apart. By the time of Return of the Jedi, his decay was undeniable. His cane was no longer a prop. His laughter was masked with agony. His body shook with movement. He looked weak, but his weakness was not the absence of power. It was too much power, trapped beneath dying flesh. The storm within him was beginning to outgrow its cage. One unrestrained moment, one uncontrolled surge of power, and he could ignite himself from the inside out. This is why, before Dark Empire and it recontextualizing the lore, he didn't want to fight Luke directly. He was still the last master of the rule of two, the philosopher of patience, control, and manipulation. He believed subtlety was still his strength, that he could turn Luke as he had turned Anakin without lifting a blade. But he was standing at the end of the era. The rule of two was dying with him. His body, his restraint, his philosophy. Everything that had defined Darth Sidious was collapsing, and when he returned, he would no longer hide like the rule of two. He would no longer manipulate from shadow. He would become what the ancients had been, a conqueror, a warlord, a god of pure dark energy. The Emperor's final victory, his final form was never meant to come through war. It was meant to come through immortality. The cloning vats were ready. The rituals were complete. He had mapped the void and learned how to cross it. So when Vader turned on him, when the lightning poured through his body and the storm finally escaped its cage, Sidious did not die with a final whimper. Instead, he roared back to reality, because the flesh was gone. The burden was lifted. The storm was free. The man who had ruled through control was about to enter a realm without it, and dominate even that. The galaxy believed the Emperor was dead, that the last shadow of the Sith had been burned away. But in the depths of the deep core, the world of Byss still pulsed. The clones waited. The machines hummed. In the void between life and death, something furious stirred. Once death had lived inside him, now he lived inside death. The cage of flesh was gone. and in Dark Empire, the storm is free. The Palpatine who returns in Dark Empire is not a schemer bound by the rule of two, nor a dying man hiding behind an empire of bureaucracy and fear. He is something unrecognizable and unique. He is a being of willpower reborn through alchemy. Palpatine believes he now possesses the ability and has mastered essence transfer, that if he wants, he can move his spirit endlessly through each clone body. But each clone body is much younger, the limits of Sidious seemingly completely removed. This is Darth Sidious at his absolute peak, when he is the apex predator. He even operates differently, no longer operating like the rule of two Sith did, but is something unbound. He had become an emperor not just of people, but seemingly of reality itself. And we will explore this, the emperor at his absolute peak, in an upcoming video. The moment where Palpatine seemingly ceases to be a man and becomes something that the galaxy has never seen before. He is literally a storm given form, and this is undeniably his most powerful version. But anyway, my friends, we hope to explore that with you soon. I do hope that you enjoyed this video and how Dark Empire recontextualizes Palpatine and a real fear that he had for Luke for a reason that many wouldn't think. But as always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the archives here today, and as always, may the Force be with you.